Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Sam could see the two older men, Will and Artie, standing together on Will's front porch like a pair of well-trained watchdogs. Their two boys played catch with a battered baseball out in Will's field. It's a good field, thought Sam. Will really ought to plant something in it. Sam knew Will's reasons for letting the field run to fallow. Still, it was an awfully good field, deep and fertile and far from the public eye. Will's grandfather had won the land in a poker game and had closed a deal in the knife fight that ensued afterwards. The original owner, drunk on too much stump liquor, had pulled a hunting knife from his belt and demanded his deed back. Will's grandfather, or so the story is told, broke the man's arm and took the knife from him and promptly gave the knife back to the man, blade first. Will had told Sam the tale one night while roaring drunk. The evening stood out in Sam's memory not only for the story, but for the fact that Will was drunk enough to tell it. For though Will often drank like a fish, he rarely allowed himself to get good and tanked. Will didn't care much for losing control. Will had gone so far as to show Sam the actual deed. It was still stained with its original owner's blood. When Sam asked why he had never planted anything in the field, Will looked straight at him, suddenly sober.
You really want to plant something else out there, Sam?
Will clapped him on the shoulder.
I think we've planted more than enough out there for now. Don't you?
Sam had shut up. He knew Will was right. Will was always right.
Can I go play, Dad?
Asked Samuel. Sam started from his memory and smiled at his son, who had glided up behind him so quietly Sam hadn't even heard his approach.
Sure, run and be a kid,
said Sam.
Let your old man worry about being a grown-up.
Young Samuel ran off towards the other boys, only too eager to leave the oppressive pall of his father's shadow. Sam heaved a sigh after him and then turned and continued towards Will's front porch.
He's going to ask me,
Will thought.
My Jesus, I just know that he's going to ask me.
The porch looked like a ransacked locker room with at least half a dozen baseballs and bats scattered about. Both the men wore baseball caps, and if Sam hadn't known better, he'd have sworn that the darkest thing the two men had to think about was whether or not their favorite team would win the World Series. Will leaned heavily upon his own favorite bat. It was a Louisville Slugger, weighted heavy for most men, but in Will's hands it swung as light as a willow wand. He was a big, stocky man, but it wasn't just his size that impressed people. It was his air of absolute capability. Will looked like the kind of man who could build a house, fix a car, plant a field, hunt a bear, and sleep with just about any woman he chose. Will was an alpha male, a man's man, and he carried himself like he knew it. Artie was more Sam's size and looked like the accountant that he was. He stood in Will's shadow back by the beer cooler. Both men had bottles in their hands. As Sam drew nearer, Will nodded and said something to Artie, who, without warning, scooped up a ball and drilled it in Sam's direction. Sam wasn't wearing a glove, but he caught the hard-chucked ball just the same. It was expected of him. He managed to grin against the stinging pain.
That the best you can do?
Sam asked gamely. Will took a swallow of beer, his eyes never leaving Sam's.
That's the best he can do,
Will answered, nodding derisively towards Artie. Artie just shrugged. He was technically the better pitcher of the pack of them, but it was an honest fact that he couldn't match Will for sheer power. Will stared up at the sun as if it were a clock.
You're late,
he said in Sam's direction. Sam looked up at the sun. It just looked like a big-ass ball of burning gas to him. He wondered if Will really could tell the time by the sun, or if it were all for show. With Will, you never quite knew for sure. That was part of his magic. Will grinned, and it made him look mean. He had a face like a ring-seasoned boxer. His eyes looked like hard, narrow gun sights. He always reminded Sam of a surly Robert Mitchum. Will claimed to have been a Navy SEAL as a young man, and although both Sam and Artie couldn't swim a stroke, neither dared to say differently. You just never could tell with Will. Artie looked up at the sun and nodded, but Sam wasn't fooled. He knew Artie was just following Will's lead.
You want a beer?
Artie asked, glancing at Will to see if it was okay, even though it was probably Artie who had paid for the beer. Will nodded his head so slightly that Sam almost didn't see it move, just a notch or two that could be caught only if you were watching closely. "Sure," Sam said. Artie knelt and retrieved the beer from the cooler. He passed it to Will, who handed it to Sam. "There you go," Will said. Sam reached for the beer, only Will wouldn't let it go. "How come you were late?" Will asked. "She keep you?" Sam shrugged.
Snooze alarm kept begging to be hit,
Sam said. Will snorted derisively.
You still using that damn clock radio of hers?
He asked. Artie tried to intercede.
Sam likes to wake up to his baseball. Don't you, Sam?
Artie said.
That's a fact, I do,
Sam said.
A day without horsehide is like a day without sunshine.
Will nodded another half-notch or so and let Sam have his bottle.
Probably slipped through the first inning thanks to that damn snooze button,
Will said.
You ought to get yourself a good old-fashioned alarm clock like me. I got a big old brass bastard. Goes off like a fire alarm, and I'm out of bed at 5 every morning, sharp as steel nails.
Will slammed the head of the bat down against the pine floorboards for emphasis.
Don't flinch,
Sam told himself. It was too late for that. Both he and Artie jumped slightly at the sound of the impact. Sam swallowed slowly.
You're right, Will. I ought to get myself a good old-fashioned alarm clock, by God. I've got one I can give you,
Artie said with a nervous laugh.
The bastard keeps going off 5 sharp every morning. I'd like to slam it with the baseball bat someday.
Sam laughed, but Will didn't think it was all that funny. He swiveled his gaze towards Artie and nailed him with a look as hard as a ball-peen hammer.
Somebody ought to slam you with a baseball bat, Artie.
Will raised the bat and let it drop within his grip, bouncing it 3 or 4 times against the floorboards. Artie choked on a swallow of beer. Sam watched the two men closely. The morning sun had just begun to climb towards noon, and it beat down mercilessly upon Sam's bare head. The other two men wore ball caps, but Sam worried too much about his receding hairline to risk a cap. Will bounced the bat again, and it sounded easier, like he was getting ready to relax.
Any of you girls see the game last night?
Will asked. Artie grinned, glad to be let off the hook.
Cardinals kicked ass,
Artie said.
The Yankees' ass begged to be kicked,
Will corrected.
The Yankees' asses have been begging to be kicked ever since they let that damn Puerto Rican faggot take over as team manager.
Sam spoke up without thinking.
It isn't always the manager's fault,
he said, and then suddenly wished he hadn't. Will turned to him coldly.
It's always the manager's fault,
Will said. He grinned fiercely.
A damned fine sacrifice brought 2 men in,
Will observed. And then, without looking toward Sam, he asked,
Have you finished with Susan yet, Sam?
Damn it,
thought Sam.
Damn it, damn it, damn it.
Sam stayed silent. Artie finished his beer and leaned over carefully to place the empty bottle between his feet. Sam could feel the sun burning into his scalp. He tried not to look away. He wanted to dig his toe into the ground, like a small boy who's been found out at some mischief.
Not yet,
he said finally. Will nodded as if expecting that answer.
Have to be soon,
Will said, nodding toward the boys playing in the field.
Soon, before she makes too much more of an impression on the boy.
Sam closed his eyes wearily.
She's his mother, damn it.
Will remained obstinate.
Don't matter. You know it's got to be done,
Will said.
It's for the boy's own good.
Again, another nod towards the distant boys.
We've talked about it enough,
Will said.
You girls sit here while I go teach your boys how to swing a bat.
He jogged out toward the field without looking back. Artie bent and picked up his empty beer bottle. For a moment it looked as if he were about to fling it at Will's back. Then he quietly replaced the beer bottle without saying a word. The two men watched Will in the field, already shouting instructions at their sons.
It won't be easy letting go of her,
Artie noted.
but I'll have to.
Sam thought.
That's what you're really saying. I've got to because he says so.
They stood quietly for a while.
Little Artie dreamed of his mother last night,
Artie said in a half-embarrassed tone. Sam wasn't listening.
He does that sometime, although I don't think he really remembers her.
Sam nodded absently.
I don't think he remembers his sister at all,
Artie went on. He looked down nervously at his shoes, like he'd suddenly noticed something dirty on them, and then he stared out towards the field.
Don't tell Will, okay?
He asked. Sam nodded, only half listening.
About the dream, okay?
Sam nodded again. The silence simmered between them. Sam heaved a heavy sigh.
Damn it, what about Samuel?
Sam snapped. He looked out toward the boys, but he couldn't make out one form from the others in all the running confusion.
He's a big boy,
Artie said.
He can take it. He'll grow out of it. Hell, he'll probably grow because of it. You know what Will says? Take the woman out of the boy, and the boy will become a man.
Sam nodded slowly. More silence. They watched Will clouting out pop flies and the boys hooting with joy.
What if he grows away from me?
Sam suddenly asked.
What if he grows towards him?
Artie didn't have an answer. The two men stood there in silence, staring out at Will and their sons.
I'm not going to do it,
Sam said quietly. Artie looked at Sam.
You can't back out now,
Artie said.
You're in too deep.
He paused, stealing another look at his shoes.
We both are,
he added. Sam looked out at Will.
I'm not afraid of him,
Sam said. As if he had heard Sam's quiet declaration, Will turned to look towards the porch. There was something in that slow and dangerous turn of Will's head that reminded Sam of a tank turret. Will started in from the field, advancing on the two men. The three boys were at his heels, begging for a chance at the bat, but he held it high on his shoulder, too high for any of them to reach. As he got closer, Sam bent and picked up a baseball. He threw it at Will as hard as he could. He was aiming for Will's head. It missed. The boys ran off after it, bent on retrieving it. By the time they caught up with the ball, they had already forgotten the men standing on the porch. If Will noticed the throw, he showed no sign. He tipped his hand up in a beer-drinking gesture at Artie. Artie hadn't waited. He was already kneeling by the cooler in the shadow of Will's porch. Will carried the beer towards Sam.
Have you made up your mind?
He asked. Sam nodded defiantly.
I'm not doing it, Will. I've made up my mind. You can't make me do it.
Will nodded like he had been expecting it. He tipped the beer up and drained the bottle in one long, measured, methodical chug. Then all at once, he brought the empty beer bottle down like a blackjack against the back of Sam's neck. Sam dropped to his knees. He tried to rise, but Will was too damn big and fast, slamming the butt of the bottle again and again against Sam's head, neck, and back. From behind, Sam felt Artie joining in, using his own beer bottle on Sam's defenseless back. Some inside part of his vision saw his own son running towards the porch, but the other two boys caught the boy in mid-flight.
Samuel!
Sam shouted fearfully from out of the cloud of his own agony, the blood in his mouth slurring his words. Will stopped the beating just as suddenly as he'd begun it. He turned towards the boys.
Little Sam,
Will called out.
Don't worry about your father. We're just playing a grown-up game is all.
Then he turned back to Sam.
Tell him you're okay,
he growled.
Tell him you're okay, or I'll sick the other two boys on him.
Sam shook off the pain. Daddy's okay, Samuel, Sam said hastily.
Call him Little Sam,
Will added. Daddy's okay, little Sam, Sam reiterated.
Little Will, Little Artie, Little Sam, you three go on back to your playing.
The two older boys coerced little Sam reluctantly back into the game. Will stepped back from Sam.
Stand up,
he ordered. Sam stood up, trying to hide his pain in case his son was still watching.
Get him a bat,
Will ordered Artie. Artie picked up a bat from behind the beer cooler and handed it to Sam. Sam looked at the bat, dangling limply from his hand. He thought about using it on Will.
Try it, and your boy will pay,
Will said, as if he could read Sam's mind. Sam dutifully shouldered the bat. He stared dully at Will, awaiting his orders.
You go and do what I've told you to do. What we agreed you'd do. You go ahead and deal with Susan once and for all. You defy me, and we'll bury your boy out there with all the others. We'll bury you, and we'll bury Susan, but we'll bury the boy first.
Sam thought of the three quiet wooden crosses huddled together in the far part of the field, next to the backwoods where nobody would find them. The three quiet crosses, the two wives and Artie's unfortunate daughter. He nodded painfully. He had finally made his choice. Will dug a baseball cap out from his hip pocket. He carefully placed it on Sam's head.
There,
Will said.
You're a man now.
Sam didn't hear him. He couldn't hear a thing. He shouldered the baseball bat like a soldier marching off to war and walked slowly back towards his home. The two older men stood on the porch watching him leave.
He's a good man,
Artie said.
He'll do what he has to do.
Will took a couple of practice swings with his own bat, aiming roughly at head level.
He better,
he said. After Sam was out of earshot, Will called the three boys in.
You boys get shovels. We're going to play pirate.
The three boys stared up at him like a litter of puppies staring up at their chosen sire, and then ran eagerly off to fetch the shovels.
The world is more alive at night. It's like God isn't looking. Elvis Presley. The following tape recording was found at the scene at the Sundance Motel near the Belle River, Louisiana. Testing. 1, 2. Well, I'm alive and here I am. Yet another lonely night. Driving on yet another dark highway in this foul year of our Lord 1988. The headlights of other solitary drivers are all passing me by in a haze out there. It's all just a blur. I wonder how many of them are thinking the same thing, cooped up in their little aluminum coffins like me. Life. It's all just some goddamn pantomime, and we all know it. But we go through the motions regardless. You walk down the streets at night and everyone's behaving like dogs. The buildings are all scarred with jailhouse tattoos, and the diesel smell in the air makes you want to gag on your own tongue. Kinda makes you wonder what it's all for, don't it? Driving alone in the emptiness of night always has that ability to install a sense of melancholia in me. Here I am, and here lies behind me just another wasted day gone up in smoke. The awful city in my wake spills out like an overflowing sewer across the delta. Here lies a man, not that the cavalcade of prostitutes and losers on the street corners would care anyway. Usually, I would be all somber and depressed on this kind of night, but not anymore. Not now. No, tonight is a special night. It's my last night in town. I'm grinning from ear to fucking ear. I just left New Orleans. I just robbed the CVS there on the outskirts. Stuck my blade right in the man's face and told him to give me everything. No, I didn't kill him. I just put the fear of God in him instead. Under my arm as I left the store was a crate of Miller Lite, 2 bottles of hooch, one of which is now half empty, and 2 packs of Marlboro Reds. Not to mention $259. Yep, it's gonna be one wild night. I stole one of them dictaphones that you see on detective shows too. Little handheld tape recorder thing. That's what I'm speaking into right now. Treat this recording as a confession, a diary, an acknowledgement of my existence, or whatever you choose. It doesn't really matter to me. By dawn, I won't be here anyway. And I'll tell you why. That asshole boss of mine called me into his office just before clocking out on a Friday. And you know what? He fired me right there. Can you believe that? 30 years I've been with that company. 30 years of my life given to them, and some slick little bastard in a tie calls me in and fires me without severance on a Friday afternoon. He said I was underperforming. That's the word he used. I hate that kind of talk. That's one of them buzzwords that carries a lot of weight but doesn't actually mean anything. 20 years my younger, and he fires me. No talk, no warnings, just a cold cut. The little bastard probably can't even tie his shoelace, and he's got more money than the entire floor I worked on. I went to Brown. I worked in finance my entire life, and he treated me like I never meant nothing. But I tell you what does mean something. I stole his car, a suave little Mercedes with a convertible roof. That'll teach him. Why? Because I just don't give a crap anymore. I've been nothing but a good person my whole life, and where has it gotten me? Just another divorced 50-year-old bum whose kids won't even pick up the phone to him anymore. Well, tonight, cowboy, it ends. I'm going off the edge, out with a bang. I'm heading to Lafayette, and I'm gonna kill that slick little prick. On the passenger seat is my Remington 870 shotgun and 2 Colt 1911s. He deserves it. That's what I think. People like him get to do what they want, and the rest of us suffer in silence. The world is on a diagonal now, but tonight, I'm the balancing point. On the I-10. It's a bit later now. Must be midnight. Can't quite read my watch on account of the bourbon. But I thought best to document this night as and when it unfurls before me. And boy, I thought I'd document this. I've just pulled away from some fly-ridden gas station outside Baton Rouge. I think it was off Interstate 10. I just filled up the little tin can that was my boss's car. And as I did, I stood there in the silence. The night was quiet. Quieter than normal. Had to admit, I felt pretty exposed. The air seemed thicker than usual. It was hot. The pops of sweat ran down my back like beads of oil. The flies buzzed all around the twitching halogen lamps in the forecourt. I peered beyond that island of light at the station and out to the dark bayous of Atchafalaya beyond. They stretched on endlessly into the sultry night. Toads ribbited, and at the edges of the swamps just past the highway, the hissing of those crocs was as clear as cop sirens to me. Something was not right back at that station. Maybe I've had too much to drink, but something don't feel right at all. There's a net settling over us tonight. I saw a man slumped over back there. He was near the ATM. He was convulsing and fitting. The cashier in the station didn't take any notice of either of us out there on the forecourt. I stood at the car and looked down at him. At first, I just thought he was just some junkie, just another crumpled life. But then I saw his mouth, and what was frothing out of it. a thick, bubbling white liquid. Rabies. The poor son of a bitch had rabies. When you get to the point where you're fitting on the asphalt of some gas station, you're pretty much fucked. His face was all swollen and bruised like he had been stung by a gang of hornets, like his face was half filled up with water. But the thing that really scared me was how in between the man's excruciating fits, he managed to glare right at me and point his finger at my body. His eyes were wide and black and hollow, and he just stared up at me, gasping, while all the froth and sickness of the damned seeped down his vest. He didn't even seem to be living anymore. His mind had left him. Maybe he was asking for help? It was like a warning or a bad omen, but one I didn't understand. I was so shook up that I leapt into the car and sped away from the station, kicking up bits of stone as I did. The gas station disappeared into the wall blackness behind me like a fading star. I dared not look back in the rearview mirror, just in case. That man was still there on the forecourt, pointing at me, dying, choking, decaying. His swollen, bloodied eyes still staring at me. That was a while ago. I managed to finish the first bottle of hooch. Now I have no idea where I'm driving to. Guess I just want to get away from the crazy bastard. Because of that, I think I've taken a wrong turn somewhere. That's what happens when you see some lone dying man sucking on his last petrol-soaked breaths at the edges of society. It sends you off the reservation too. Something's not right. Feels like tonight is our night of judgment. There's a pestilence coming. All around me are those endless bayous and swamps. The single road I'm on, carving its way down the middle of the dark mire like a great tarmac snake towards my terminus. Anyway, let's forget all that for now. I'll tell you one thing, though. Louisiana is hotter than the devil's asshole. Must be old Scratch himself coming for me. Time for a cigarette and a swig of bourbon. I think it's time for the Rolling Stones, too. Let's welcome the old bastard to my side. Shall we?
2 hours go by.
Here's official. I'm lost. I don't know where in Christ's name I am. I even entertained the idea of turning back and sleeping this one off, but now I am well and truly in the back old beyond. Cajun country. So much for one wild night. This was not the type of wild I had in mind. The rows and rows of cypress trees out there in the bayous are starting to make me feel uncomfortable. And I'm still speaking into this dumb tape recorder like it means something. It's 1 in the morning and I've started on the Millers, about halfway through the crate. I think I may be heading towards Vermilion Bay, but can't be too sure. You know, they call it the Bay of Blood. Vermilion was a red substance made from mercury sulfide. Imagine that. Who even cares? The swollen silver moon is hanging high in the sky above. It's casting this weird scintillating glow over everything. Out there in the swamps as well, the Creole fishermen made their huts. Makes me scared. How the hell do people live out here? Might as well live on the far side of Saturn. The road just keeps... Wait, what the fuck is that? There's people on the road ahead. 4 of them. Shit. I'm just passing by. Jesus Christ, I think they were dragging a body off the road. I just saw a couple of shirtless, ragged people dragging something across the asphalt and into the woods back there. Whatever it wasn't moving. It looked like a body. Sheesh. There's something wet on the road. It's black. I can see my rearview mirror. What the hell? Did I just witness a murder? Their faces didn't look right, man. The waning of the moon highlighted all their disgusting features. They looked like that guy back at the gas station. Their faces were all swollen and bleeding from the eyes. Have they got the rabies too? What the hell's wrong with these people out here? I swear one of them had some kind of scythe. I don't like this, man. I'll turn him back.
Much later.
It's 2 in the morning. I guess I was pretty shook up after what I saw back down them dark roads, so I stopped off at the nearest motel I could find. The Sundance Motel, it's called. Somewhere down by Morgan City. One of them yellow-stained old lodges that only truckers and drug dealers dare stop off at. I'm sitting on a single bed in the cheapest room they had. I can't put that scene out of my head. For some reason, I can't be shut of it. I mean, what the hell are those people doing out on that road at night with that body? They move different. Like all walked like they were drunk and didn't know where they were. Something's abroad here. Feels like it's all connected somehow. The rabid man back at the gas station's trying to warn me, but warn me of what? I don't know. The motel is a sad old thing. Faded neon sign with half the letters blown out. The mold on the walls of the room is slick and black and full of promises of illness. The carpet is damp, and I'd be damned if I take my shoes off. I set out to murder my boss tonight, but instead, I ended up in the armpit of hell. Nothing else to do but drink myself into oblivion. Nothing else to do but wonder just how far off the rails I've fallen. By sunup, the last of the booze will be gone. Whoever finds this tape, if I'm no longer alive, I didn't commit suicide. The mold on the walls probably got me. Yes, that was a joke, asshole. Very funny. Ha ha. If it's any consolation, I was never going to kill my boss. I guess I just wanted to hurt him like he had hurt me. I wanted him to fear for his life. And for my sins, I'm fearing for mine. Maybe they'd go easy on me if I returned the car with a full tank of gas.
Much later into the night.
I don't know what to make of any of this. Honest to God, I don't. I just woken up in a daze on the damn floor of this shitty motel room. I'd finished all the booze, and I guess at some point in the night, I must have passed out on the carpet here. When I finally got up out of the puddle of vomit I found myself in sometime later, I looked up at the clock on the wall. It said 3:13. It still says 3:13, but that's impossible. I must have checked into this dive at 2 in the morning. That plus a couple of hours drinking and watching bad cable TV should have taken me up to at least daybreak. I remember the blur of adverts and softcore porn. But it's still nighttime out there. The clock on the wall still says 3:13. The second hand ticks but doesn't edge any further forward. Something is wrong here, but that's not what has got me so riled up, though. Something else just happened. Something I'm not sure I have the words to even explain right now. As I raised up and sat on the bed about 10 minutes ago, trying to shake my head clean of the hangover, I'd heard something. This low scratching and slapping sound. It was coming from my left, towards the bathroom. It sounded like lazy flesh rubbing against wood. Blearily, my eyes were tugged towards the bathroom door. On the other side of the cheap pine door, something was rapping against it. I dropped my gaze to the base of the door and saw that the lights were on in there. The two pillars of shadows that could have only been legs moved around in the light. Someone was in there. Someone was in the room with me. I jolted up in shock. I didn't remember ever using the bathroom. I didn't even know what it looked like. The second I'd gotten into this roach pit, I started drinking, and that was that. But when I'd woken up from the blackout, the fear sunk back into me, cold and hard. My heart pounded in my ribcage like a nuclear bomb. It was the same fear I'd felt when I saw them strangers on the road earlier, the ones that were collecting the roadkill. It was the same primal fear that a deer must feel when the hungry stare of a wolf is on its back. Instinctually, I had reached for the shotgun by the pillow. I didn't make a sound. Each movement was slow and cautious. With one smooth motion, I grabbed the shotgun and cocked it. The mechanism only gave off a faint click. I stood up from the bed. Then, with slow, soft steps, I approached the bathroom. The shotgun pointed out ahead of my torso like a protecting spear. I sucked in quiet, controlled breaths and crept towards the door. On the other side, I heard coughing, shouting, sobbing. Whatever it was once a human. I reached out and clasped the doorknob firmly in my palm. Then, with resolution in me, I yanked it open. When the door swung back and revealed what was on the other side, I screamed. There, standing in the middle of the bathroom, bathed in the twitching amber lights, was a man. Except he wasn't a man anymore. Parts of his body were all infected and swollen like they were filled with pus. The thing craned its head up and stared at me. He saw me and came staggering out of the bathroom towards me, trousers down around his ankles. His shirt was all ripped up like he'd been brawling with a crocodile. Worst of all, his face was swollen and bloated, just like all the others. The pores in his skin squirmed like they were filled with worms. "Jesus, who are you?" I think I asked him, but he didn't say anything. He couldn't. Thick black liquid poured from his mouth and eyes. His hollow eyes reflected a mind that had left long ago. Now there was only this rabid and feral animal in front of me. He coughed a bunch of spit and blood onto the carpet, then he screeched and hissed as he lurched at me, arms outstretched, ready to embrace me as one of his own. I yelped, and without even thinking, raised up the shotgun and let loose with two 12-gauge buckshots. The shotgun kicked like a mule in my grip, and the deceased man absorbed the shots like they were nothing. I stood in front of the writhing thing and was utterly shocked. He was still standing. The two shots hit him dead in the chest and put a hole straight through his rib cage. Any normal human would have hit the deck like a sack of spuds, but he didn't. I remember screaming. Maybe I shouted something at him too. The man spasmed and then tried to run at me. In a split second, I let off one more shot at his head. The thunder of the shotgun sounded like a stick of dynamite going off in my ears. The man's head snapped back from the impact. Then, when his head raised back up again, it was all mangled and bloody. I just stared at what was left of his face, clutching my shotgun tight. As he stood there, his body swaying from side to side, the skin on his head peeled off like a banana. It dropped down to his neck in flaps, and the writhing black husk underneath was like nothing I'd ever seen before. I don't think I've described that properly. Let me say it like this. Underneath his skin, there were no bones. There was no skull. Instead, this thick, slithering worm came out from his throat and took the spot where the man's face used to be. I gasped and took a step back, pointing my Remington up at it. He looked like a black anaconda that had been hiding in his chest the whole time. The man's body slumped to the floor with a thud. I stood above him and peered down at the utter horror before my eyes. All around his corpse now was a strange black blood that seemed to be teeming with some kind of pond life. The slick black worm protruding from his neck then wriggled free of the body and slithered off quickly to the bathroom. It was more scared of me than I was hit. It fled down the plug hole of the bath and left behind it a trail of clear ooze, like a slug. "What the fuck?" I think I had said. Then I threw up some. I tell you, I was so overwrought that I dropped my shotgun and fell to my knees before God right there and then. I prayed and prayed. What was happening scared the shit out of me. Is this punishment for my sins? Is this my perdition? I don't know. All of that was about 10 minutes ago, and the clock on the wall is still saying 3:13. I think this might be hell. Just to make sure I wasn't dreaming, I got up from the bed and peered out the yellow-stained windows of my room. In the dim parking lot of the motel were about 10 of those same people. They're waiting for me. All of them bloated and motionless, like they don't know what to do with themselves. Some are stumbling around and crowing up at the moon. Others are standing still and throwing up this tar-like substance at their feet. Their skin is bubbling with sores and boils. I don't know what's going on here, but they're all sick. There's a pestilence going around. Maybe something in the water. It all started with that man back at the gas station. I should have listened to him. God damn it. 4 hours later. It's been at least an hour now. I haven't moved. Neither have they. I'm sitting at the desk and the clock still hasn't moved forward anymore. I think this might be my end. Jesus, how did I get here? You know, I had a wife once. Been divorced about 10 years now. Clara was her name. Yeah, everything after that went to shit. I guess since the papers were signed, it all went into a downward spiral. Can't say I'm surprised. I haven't been exactly truthful, by the way. Now that it seems I'm about to join the ranks of hell, I guess I should be. He didn't fire me for underperforming. He fired me because I drank too much. Goddamn. Since Clara left me, I've been hitting the bottle pretty hard. Tried to come off it, but the withdrawal's like nothing I'd ever expected. So here I am. Just another lonely bum on his way out. I doubt I'm the only one. It hurts in your chest, you know? That razor-tipped sadness that only cuts in deeper as the years crawl by. Eventually, everything good leaves you, until you're nothing but a bloated vessel, full of cheap booze and blue ruin. In the end, you find yourself spilling your guts out over the sides like some burst mains pipe full of rag water, spewing it all out to anyone who will listen. You find yourself sitting alone in a roach pit, mumbling into a stolen tape recorder, doubting yourself, and trying to piece together the broken mirror of just how you managed to fuck your life up so much. Did I imagine the whole goddamn thing? I don't know. Part of the alcohol withdrawal is hallucinations. God, I pray it's that. As I look across from me, back to the unnamed headless and diseased man that once was a human, he's still on the carpet not 10 feet away from me. So, I guess this must be real. I don't want to be like this. If I get out of here, I'm gonna change. I promise. Just give me one shot. Just let me live. I'm gonna make a break for it now. There are 10 of them infected outside my window, but the car's only across the parking lot. My guns are loaded, and I want to escape. If I run, I think I can make it. Well, I did say it was going to be my last night in town. Here goes nothing.
Wendell pulled at the vines, damp with dew that were in his way. He'd been trudging through the trees since sundown. The air held a dampness and a chill, but he still sweated with the exertion of making this journey. It was not something he ever expected to find himself doing, but fate had led him here. Wendell was too old for this kind of trek, and his body wouldn't let him forget it. His bones creaking like an old door, and his muscles burning in protest. He knew it was a little crazy, but he also knew that he had to do it. It was a final act of love. Wendell was doing this for Elsie. There was nothing he wouldn't do for Elsie. After 30 years of marriage, she still mattered more than anything else in the world. Their children had already grown, left and married someone on their own, just like it was when they met. It was just the two of them, alone in their little cottage, passing the days away together until she got sick. Watching the love of his life fade from the world was the hardest thing Wendell ever had to do, but as much as each passing day felt like an enormous fist punching away at his heart, he wouldn't have given up a single moment of it. Since the first day he'd looked into Elsie's eyes, every moment with her was one that had been cherished, even the hard ones. Now Wendell was here, trying not to trip over roots and rocks as he trudged past vines and branches to navigate the wilderness of what Elsie believed was an enchanted forest. There were people here that he needed to find. He didn't know where they were or how he would find them in the dense underbrush packed with vegetation. He was kind of just hoping he would know somehow. The whole trip was a long shot, and more than a little bit crazy, but so was love, wasn't it? Wendell hadn't believed in the people of the forest, but Elsie had sworn by them and their magic. If there was any hope, any inkling of a chance that she was correct, then they could be what he needed to save her. Wendell had to try. For her, he had to try. He would have taken any journey if it meant saving her. The hardest part of the whole thing was being away from her while she faded away. He was missing precious moments with her, while he was searching these overgrown woods for the magical people she told so many heartfelt stories of. Elsie held them in high regard and claimed to have seen them herself, even holding one as a child. He was missing time with her to be here, but the look on her face when he told her where he was going was worth it. She was so happy, so proud, even as sick as she was. And that was why he could never give up, never turn back. The healer had already said he had expended his resources. There was nothing in modern science that was going to fix her and remove the illness that had invaded her body. He said it was time for Wendell to just keep her comfortable until the lost ones came to claim her and take her to the other side. That was all that was left for his darling Elsie. Wendell wasn't ready to accept such as an outcome so easily. He couldn't even bear the thought of a life without her. It took the air from his tired old lungs. Wendell couldn't even remember life before Elsie, and he tested it by thinking back. It was like his life started when he met her, like he himself didn't exist before their love did. How was he supposed to go on afterward? He was already an old man. In his mind, as he pushed his bent back through the wild greenery, Wendell recalled Elsie's sickly pallor as she smiled through it and told him tales of the magical people of the forest. It brought back light into her eyes after the sickness had made it dwindle down to almost nothing. If Elsie was so certain that the people of the forest were real, then, as her husband, Wendell owed it to her to find them. Maybe it was a fool's errand or a wild goose chase, but if it brought one more smile to her precious face, then he'd do it 100 times over. Elsie had been talking about the people of the forest the entire time he'd known her. He tried to remember all the things she had said over the years, the stories she had told him when she returned from picking apples or washing clothes down at the river. In his mind, he was searching her stories, old and new, for clues to the whereabouts of these magical people she spent her life putting so much stock in, so much faith. Wendell tried to recall the details of the forest and where she said she went to find the little folk and their brethren. He was going on faith, taking her details as accurate, believing her every word about something wholly unbelievable, and he laughed at himself for it as he leaned against a tree to catch his breath, moist bark wetting his tunic. Regarding himself as a little bit ridiculous, and possibly a tad bit mad, did nothing to deter him. It only made him think of Elsie when she was healthy and vibrant, and the way she would always laugh at him and shake her head, saying, "You're a silly old man, Mr. Holloway." And he would reply, "If it makes you smile, I'm proud to be." To which she would say, "See?" as she shook her head and laughed at him again. Wendell always listened to her stories, even though he thought that maybe she had eaten the wrong mushroom while she was out there. She always looked so happy talking about them, the little folk, and the people of the forest that they guarded, even if it was all in her imagination or regurgitating stories that her father had told her when she was a child. He could have listened to her all day when she was that happy. She had a glow to her when she spoke about them, like a little bit of their magic flowed through her. Tears came to his eyes as he thought about it. He choked back a sob and put his fist in his mouth. His heart was breaking inside of him, and he swore he could feel it like it was made of so much porcelain. Elsie had her own magic that hypnotized him immediately and seemed to infect everyone she met over the years they were together. She was so animated, alive. She was wonderful. Wendell ached to see her like that again. He would have done anything for it, even forfeited his own life, if it meant a few more moments with her feeling good. He felt like so much of him was dying with her anyway. Maybe he would see her healthy, see her happy, her contagious smile lighting up the world once more, if the people of the forest deemed it so. She certainly believed in what they could do. How could he not do the same? If anything Elsie had told him was true, then Wendell should be close to their domain now. He had to be. The darkness was growing in the star-thin sky, a sign of how long he'd already been out here already. He'd be close to finding these people, and once he did, they would have the magical ability to fix everything, to make Elsie brand new. On the other hand, he could be wandering around those woods searching for something that didn't even exist. All he could do was hope, and so hope he did. Wendell's eyes widened with excitement when he spied something from Elsie's tails. His broken heart accelerated, and he quickened his pace as much as his old body would allow. The weight of the sack at his back seemed to push him through the ground. He was in pain, but he trudged on. The sack contained his offering, and soon it would be a weight lifted in order to lift one even greater. Wendell reached the star-shaped clearing Elsie had told him of. If nothing else, her directions seemed to be real. Up to this point, everything was just as she had told him it would be, as she recalled from her days of youthful vigor. Just ahead was the cave she mentioned, like a dark, toothless mouth yawning. That was how she had told it, and it was a fitting description he now saw. He chuckled and thought to himself that he was glad it didn't come with teeth. Wendell caught his breath and let his old bones and muscles rest a moment. Then he headed straight for the dark opening in the rock. It was almost as if it called to him. He was so close now. Wendell didn't know what was happening to Elsie back home, or how much time he had to succeed. He definitely knew that time was of the essence, and he needed to make haste. Before he even had left, Elsie had gone past pale to this dull gray tone, like death had already taken her. She was so thin and frail that he could see her bones protruding more each day, like they were soon to burst through her flesh. She could barely even talk to him anymore. She struggled for air, and when she found it, she coughed, a cough that ended with blood in a kerchief. She still managed to smile, to light up, when he told her where he was going and why. Wendell hated leaving her alone, but if it was to save her, to heal her, it was worth it. But if she died before he could... He couldn't think about it. He had to just keep going. When he reached the entrance to the cave, Wendell ducked his balding head to fit through the opening of the forest's yawning mouth. Something fluttered by his head, and he swatted it away. Mosquitoes had been harassing him since he first ventured into the trees. The forest came with bugs. They were everywhere, though he wasn't sure what kind lived within the darkness of a cave. None that he wanted to meet, he was sure. The more he went forward, the more the flittering things were, buzzing all around him. It was maddening. "Shoot," he said. "Go on." Upon closer inspection, he thought they were probably harmless. They looked less like bees or wasps, and more like moths or butterflies. Their wings were huge and transparent, but scrawled with veiny lines like the underside of the leaves of a tree. It didn't make sense to see butterflies in a cave at night, but what about this journey made sense? At last, Wendell came out the other side and found everything Elsie had said he would find. There were flowers of every color, nature's rainbow, she'd said, and they were blooming with wild abandon, stretching as far as the eyes could see. There was a magic to the scenery, the brilliant purples and golds, that lit the scenery up like lanterns. He could swear the flowers actually glowed. Lights at its center, past the brightly colored petals. The incredible garden surrounded a pond of clear sparkling water. The sun seemed to shine here even in the dark of night. He knew that it was an illusion brought on by the flowers, but it still felt to Wendell like he'd just wandered into heaven. Was this where Elsie was headed once she left him? If it was, she would be so happy. That much he knew. It was then, as he thought of this, that he noticed the bugs were not bugs at all. They were tiny winged people, the little folk that Elsie had told him about. They had every feature of a normal-sized person: arms, legs, hair, distinctly detailed faces, each one unique, and even genitals displayed on their tiny naked forms. Wendell stared back at them in shock now that he could see them clearly in the light. He couldn't believe it. They were real. If they were real, then the people of the forest were real too. The Fae, Elsie called them. Ha ha! They're real, Elsie, honey. They're real, and I found them, darling. I found them for you, he said excitedly. Then he remembered that he reacted to them with fear and hostility in the darkness of the cave, and he felt suddenly ashamed, frowning for them to see. I'm sorry about swatting at you, he said, to the crowd of tiny fluttering people. I hope I didn't hurt any of you. I'm old and I don't see well. I would never intentionally bring harm to any of you. Wendell could see their little faces, and he knew that they were talking back, yelling even, it seemed, but they were so small that all he could hear was a high-pitched chirping sound, like a hungry bird beckoning him for food. Their contorted faces and narrow eyes told him that was not at all what they were trying to convey. I'm sorry, he said again. Wendell stepped to the edge of the pond, and a bridge of sparkling gold and diamonds suddenly appeared out of nowhere, curving over the water and leading into the center of the pond, where a small island stood waiting. Was he supposed to go there? Wendell nervously chewed on his finger as he looked at the bridge in awe. He'd obviously angered the little people, and he hadn't seen the Fae yet. He didn't know if he was in any kind of danger. The bridge definitely hadn't been there a moment ago, when he first arrived in this place, but it was there now, and Wendell didn't know if he could trust it, if he should. He wanted to trust, to believe, for Elsie. Was it something physical, though? It seemed impossible. If they were magic, could it not be an illusion meant to trick him into stepping into the water? Would they laugh and feel vindicated when he plunged past the surface? What lay under the surface of such a pond? There could be any manner of creature down there. Wendell swallowed the lump that rose in his throat as he thought about it. He touched the edge of the bridge with his toe. It seemed solid enough. I'm looking for the people of the forest, he said, the Fae. Are they here? You? Are you here? Wendell frowned. He felt foolish, out of his element. To steel himself, he envisioned Elsie shaking her head and laughing at him. He nodded and took a deep breath, then, his eyes fluttering around just like the little folk that buzzed about his head. Vines sprouted up from the island before him and wrapped around themselves, tying together in loops and knots until they formed what looked to Wendell like an enormous throne of grass. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was amazing and equally terrifying. Had Elsie ever made it this far, witnessed this? He wished he had a way to capture the moment and bring it back to show her. In his mind, he imagined the look of wonder that would blaze in her eyes upon bearing witness to such a spectacle. "Hello? Is someone there?" he said. The throne remained empty. Wendell waited anxiously for something to happen, but nothing did, aside from the squeaking cries of the little folk, becoming more irate and agitated. He bit down on his knuckle. He didn't know what to do. Then Wendell remembered something else he had told him, something he had forgotten about. You needed to rub your eyes with marigold water in order to see the Fae. He had let it slip his mind. Wendell had actually brought some with him in preparation for this moment. It was in a pouch on his hip. He removed the vial from the pouch and pulled the cork stopper free and dabbed some on his fingertips, wiping it on his eyes. He looked at the throne of vines and roots again, hoping to see something different, and he did. He still couldn't believe that magic was working and myths were real. All of this seemed like no more than a strange dream to him. Someone was there, on the throne, facing him. There was nothing a moment ago, but maybe there had been, and he was just blind to them without the marigold water. It looked like a man sitting on the throne of tangled vines. He was well built, tall as a tree and shirtless, his bronze flesh sparkling like the flowers that surrounded them. He had incredibly long white hair, parted down the middle, and it fell over his shoulders, draping over the firm musculature of his chest. Wendell remembered Elsie's description of the Fae. She had remarked that they had skin the color of butterscotch. He smiled at the thought, realizing again that she had been right. The Fae's male ears came to sharp points that reached skyward. He had to be one of them, one of the people of the forest that Elsie had talked about. What else could he be? He definitely looked like a person of power, of magic. Are you Fae? Wendell asked. What have you come here for? The man asked, in a voice that sounded to Wendell like music, each syllable plucked from a harp. Wendell was taken aback by the beauty of this creature. He had never seen a man that had struck him as beautiful before, but there was no other way to describe him. He had high cheekbones and full lips that made him look seductively feminine, like a beautiful woman. If he hadn't been shirtless, Wendell might have actually thought that he was a woman. Thinking about it, maybe he still was. Wendell didn't know how gender worked with these people. Maybe he was both a man and a woman, or neither. Unlike the little folk that were flying around them both, he wore pants, and Wendell wasn't about to inquire as to what was inside them. That felt incredibly impolite, rude even, especially as it was this being's business, and had no bearing on why he was there. He was there for Elsie. That was what mattered. "It's my Elsie," Wendell said, starting over the bridge toward the strange man and his throne. "Don't come closer," the face said. "My fairies are as dangerous as they are small. Don't underestimate them." Wendell stopped there on the bridge that he still wasn't confident wouldn't disappear and take him into the depths of the pond below. He looked nervously around at the little folk that still fluttered about. They were dangerous? He looked back at the Fae, then, I won't. I need your help." "What did you bring to bargain with?" Wendell swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. "Gold," he said, patting his back. "I brought you all that I have. My Elsie is worth more than money. I have no need for money." The man nodded then and waved Wendell forward with the long, slender fingers. Wendell hurried across the bridge to the island, and then knelt before the throne, his head bowed before this royal creature. "My Elsie is home, sick. She's dying. She's the one that told me about you, about this place. She said you have magic, great, powerful magic. Please, I just want to see her healthy again. I want to be able to dance with her and talk to her like I used to. I want to see the color in her face again, the light in her eyes. Please, help me if you can. I beg of you." The Fae nodded. He held his hand out. Wendell assumed it was for the gold. He reached to his back and untied the sack that had been pressing on him for so long. Bringing it around to his front, he immediately felt the difference of not having that weight on his tired old back. He handed the sack to the tall being on the throne, who nodded and took it. Then the Fae waved a hand at Wendell, and he found himself moving back over the bridge. When his foot touched down on the grass again, the golden bridge disappeared as instantly as it had come. When Wendell looked up, the Fae was gone, too, the throne suddenly empty once again. Then the roots untangled themselves and retracted back into the earth of the small island. It seemed like none of it had ever happened. That was it? Wendell asked, looking around. Is it done? Is Elsie okay? Did it work? The only response he got was the chittering of the little folk that fluttered around him. It seemed he got what he was going to get from this place. He just hoped it was enough. He wouldn't know until he got back home. All the gold he owned was gone. There was nothing else to try after this. All that there was left to do was hope. It had gotten him this far. Wendell made his way back to the way he had come. It was easier to maneuver without the bag of gold on his back, but his old muscles were already sore and screaming at him from pushing them to get him there. He was exhausted, and it took him until the rise of the sun to make it back home. He stumbled up to the cottage and fell through the front door, collapsing to his hands and knees on the stained wood floor. He panted a moment to catch his breath and groaned against the pain of his screaming muscles and aching bones. "Elsie," he called, "I'm so sorry that I was gone so long, my love. Are you all right?" "I'm just tired, dear," she called back. "I'm glad you're home." Wendell hadn't heard her voice so loudly and clearly in so long. His heart jumped at the sound, and he felt suddenly energized. He bounded to his feet and hurried to the bedroom, where he found Elsie in bed, just as he had left her, except the color had returned to her cheeks, and she was looking at him with that gorgeous, contagious smile. He smiled back and saw the gleam in her eye when he did. She was as beautiful as ever. Wendell immediately started weeping. "You're okay," he said to her through his tears. "It worked. The Fae, I found them. They fixed you. I can't believe it. I just can't believe it." "Oh, it's okay, sweetheart. Come over here," she said sweetly. Wendell went to her. He took her face in his hands and he kissed her. She kissed him back and they held each other. He trembled as he clutched her to him. "You're so beautiful," he said. "You always were." Elsie laughed. "If you say so," she said. "My silly old man." "I do," he told her. "I do say so." Then he climbed off the bed and extended his hand to her. "Dance with me," he said, "like we used to. Come on." "Oh, I don't know," she said. "I'm tired, Wendell." "Elsie, please, one dance, that's all." She took his hand then. Wendell led her out of bed and onto the floor, and together they danced to the music of their hearts, swaying and spinning, dipping and kissing. Elsie had been right. She'd been right about everything. She was right about the forest. She was right about the little folk and the Fae, and she was right about the magic. She was right about it all. Wendell truly didn't care about the money that it took to make this happen. He would trade all the money in the world for Elsie any day. There was nothing worth more, nothing at all. The next day, while Elsie bathed and sang, Wendell wrote and sent word to his two sons to let them know that their mother had miraculously recovered from her illness. He cooked for the two of them, and they took it outdoors for a picnic. Every moment felt like a celebration. He found himself singing, randomly, for no reason, a dance in his step. Seeing her healthy like this made Wendell feel younger as well. He was sprier now that she was back to her old self. He loved seeing her laugh at him for it, too. He loved every moment, all of this. He'd never been so thankful to anyone for anything in his entire life. The following day, Elsie asked him to run to the market. He said he couldn't because they were broke. He had spent literally all their money to return her health to her. He laughed about it, not feeling the least bit upset that their life savings was now gone. Elsie inquired about their gold and his trip to the forest, and he recounted all of it for her. He delighted at how happy it made her, and he kissed her with a renewed passion they hadn't experienced in many years. That night they took a walk by the water together. They sat in the grass and looked at the stars, and they reminisced about old times, going back through their favorite moments of their many years together. They laughed and cried together and held each other close. Life was even better now than it was before she'd gotten sick. These were his favorite days of his life thus far, because he still remembered what it was like when she was sick, and he took none of this for granted. Each passing beat of their hearts resonated with him. On the 5th day since he had returned from the forest, Wendell and Elsie's son Peter arrived with his wife and daughter. Wendell ran out to greet them with incredible joy. He was so happy to see them, and for them to see Elsie alive and well. Peter hadn't seen his mother since she had first taken ill. They had been writing letters in which Wendell had been hopeful but honest about Elsie's condition. But now she'd recovered. She was like brand new. Wendell hugged them all, welcoming them. "Your mother's inside," he said to Peter. "I told her you were coming. She can't wait to see you." Peter patted his father on the arm and went inside. He came back to the door as his wife and daughter were coming in, and he physically stopped them, barring the doorway with his arm and keeping them from being able to enter the house. He leaned by his wife's ear and whispered for her to take their daughter back to the carriage. She looked at him with concern, and he just shook his head. "Please," he said, "take her and wait for me." When she did as she was asked, Peter stormed out of the house and grabbed hold of his father angrily. He stared into his eyes. Wendell had never seen his son so angry, and he couldn't imagine what had gotten into him. He returned the man's mother to him when she was all but gone. He should be happy, not like this. "Is your brain addled? What's wrong with you?" Peter demanded. Wendell looked at him with genuine confusion. He shook his head. I don't understand." Peter seized his father's arm and marched into the house, pulling the old man behind him. He dragged Wendell into the bedroom. Wendell's confusion only increased. Elsie was looking at them both with a smile in her eyes that matched her lips. She looked beautiful as ever. Wendell returned the gesture. "What are you smiling at?" Peter demanded to know. "Father, we need to bury her. This is sick. It's a horrible thing to keep Mother like this. It isn't normal. Can you not smell her? Is this some kind of foul attempt at humor?" "What did you say?" Wendell asked him, despair setting in like a kick to his heart. His hand shook at his sides. "What are you saying?" "He's right," Elsie said. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I love you. Don't be upset with him." Wendell shook his head. Something was wrong. Maybe the magic was fading. Maybe they needed more gold. He ran past his son, out of the house and into the woods. The Fae could fix it. He would get them whatever they needed. "Fantastic! I'll bury Mother by myself," Peter yelled from behind him. "Thank you for this joyous visit, Father." Wendell ran and couldn't stop until he reached the clearing and the cave and the magical land beyond. He knowingly swatted the fairies away this time. "Move, please. I'm sorry, but I need to get through, please." Wendell was crying, but he wiped his eyes with marigold water anyway. "Show yourself," he said. "Please, just tell me what I need to do. How do I save her? Please, I'm begging you. I paid you to save her, to fix her. I gave you everything. What else do you need? Tell me. I will get it for you. I don't know how, but I will. I will do whatever it takes. Just tell me, please." Wendell fell to his knees, racked by sobs, his old chest heaving, his nose running, and eyes watering. When he looked at the small island, the Fae was sitting on the throne of vines once again. Wendell was so relieved to see this strange being. He reached a hand toward the island to plead for help. "You need to bury your wife," the Fae said to him in his usual sing-song way. "But why? I thought you fixed her. She was healed. Tell me why," Wendell begged. "What did I do wrong? Why have you forsaken me?" "You said you wanted to see her healthy and talk to her like you used to. I gave you exactly what you asked for." Wendell wanted to be angry. He wanted to scream that the strange man at the forest had tricked him. He wanted to curse him for his deception, but he couldn't. He couldn't because he realized just what a wonderful gift this magical being had given him. He had 5 of the most incredible days with Elsie that he ever had in his life. He remembered every single moment of those days, and he always would, for as long as he remained alive himself. He did cherish the fact that he had gotten to see her again, in all her beauty, to hear her voice without the coughing, the beautiful melody of it. It was a much better way to see her off, to remember her. Wendell was heartbroken that it was over, but it still had been a gift that he would cherish forever. He nodded in acceptance of the truth then. Wendell looked at the Fae on his throne. Tears streamed down his face, but he dried his eyes with his sleeve, and his breathing became more regular, steady. He got to his feet and waved in a gesture of thanks before he turned his back on the Fae and walked out. Thinking about the conversation he and Elsie had under the stars brought the tears back as Wendell walked that now familiar path through the woods on his way back home. He sniffled and wiped away tears as he thought about Elsie seeing him now. He imagined her shaking her head and saying, "You're a silly old man, Mr. Holloway." "I guess I am," he said as he walked. Wendell knew that he needed to apologize to his son for such a gruesome misunderstanding, and just the same, he needed to tell him about his mother and the people of the forest, to share her many stories, and to let Peter know that magic was in fact real. His tears returned as he remembered how it felt in that moment, when he had first gotten home and heard her voice, saw her healthy. As he stepped over the roots and rocks and pushed the foliage out of the way, Wendell recalled dancing with his wife in his arms, spinning and dipping as they had. Oh, how he loved her. He loved her with everything he had, which he supposed he had now proven. He could see her bright eyes and pink cheeks as she smiled at him from behind his tearful eyes. My sweet, beautiful Elsie. My sweet, beautiful, magical Elsie.
The lights going off aboard ship is about the worst thing that can happen. It's not the dark that's the problem. No, that's upsetting in its own right. But the lights are tied to the life support system. If the lights go out entirely, that means the ship has just become a floating tomb. It should never happen. There were safeties, and safeties on top of those. It had happened to me once on a substandard freighter, but that was years and years before. When the lights went out this time, it seemed impossible. So many things would have to go wrong to knock out all the power on the ship. But there we were, drifting through the infinite void, a dark speck floating in darkness. I stepped away from the airlock, which I had been repairing. I was already suited up for my work, but I knew that others would be running to get geared up before the ship became inhospitable to life. The lights on my suit flickered to life, since I had set them for automatic activation, and my suit's bright color bounced the light down the halls, giving everything an orangish tint in my vicinity. I wasn't particularly fond of the color, but every crew member had a suit denoting their specialty aboard the ship. I was the life support tech, and I had gotten an obnoxiously bright orange suit. I thought about checking for other crew members on the suit comm, but those only worked within a certain range without the power, and it would take a few minutes for everyone to get suited up anyway. In the meantime, I pulled the manual release on the airlock shutter and closed it off. I couldn't repair the damage just then, not with the power down. Besides, I had enough knowledge that I might be of help with the electronics. I moved hastily down the hall. I spotted motion in the hall in front of me. Red. And then it was gone beyond my light before I could get a better look. Red was the medical officer, Reynard. I couldn't figure out what he'd be doing running around without his light on. He was going to end up falling down an access chute if he wasn't careful. "Reynard, is that you?" I called into my suit, hoping he was close enough to hear me.
Shit. Yes, it is. Was that you, Abel? I saw the light and it scared me.
He was breathing hard and sounded flustered. Scared you? So you ran off into the dark? I asked, skeptically. Turn on your lights before you kill yourself. I saw a glow light up at the second corridor down the hall and started moving that way.
Let's not tell anyone I scared myself and crashed down a dark hall, eh?
Reynard laughed a bit nervously. He was fairly new to shipboard life.
Reynard got scared and went running through the dark without his lights?
April's voice chirped in.
Oh man, I can't wait to tell everyone else.
Shit.
Reynard sighed to punctuate his curse.
To be fair, this place is terrifying in the dark. I was in my office when the lights went out, and I went right to the storage locker to grab my suit, but I thought I heard someone else in the room. By the time I'd sealed the helmet, I'd convinced myself I was about to be murdered by some denizen of the dark, and then you came down the hall with your light in my eyes.
Excuses aside, we need to get to the power relay and figure out what's going on. This is a serious situation. I decided to get people focused. A light circled the corner from up ahead, and I caught sight of a blue suit. April. She was the engine crew. We came together just in front of Reynard. The helmets were designed with a high-intensity photonic filter built in, which meant we could stare directly at a sun without going blind for a brief time. But it also meant there was a reflective coating over the glass that stopped us from seeing one another's faces. It was just a bit unsettling, but I was still happy to see the others. Who was on core detail? I asked as we walked together down the hall. That was April's post, but she couldn't man it all the time. When she was off, it was either Aaron, Pink, the cook, or Isaac, Green, general repair and maintenance.
Pretty sure it's Aaron. He's training in electrical subsystems, so he should be able to get us up and running again if he remembers what I taught him.
Aaron can't remember how to rehydrate eggs,
Reynard commented with a sigh. April laughed, and even I chuckled despite my anxiety. He wasn't wrong. Aaron was good at managing the kitchen and keeping us fed, but fed and happy were two very distant concepts. Fortunately, Aaron was the type of person who anyone could talk to. The captain kept him on because everyone liked him. His food was terrible, but he was an overall net gain on crew morale. We reached the doorway to the core and April activated it. It slid to the side and she let out a scream that caused my comm speaker to whine in my ear. I wasn't even sure what was going on until April backed past me, and I got a line of sight into the room.
Oh, what in the hell?
Reynard's voice was a barely audible whisper, accompanied by the sound of him struggling to keep his last awful meal down. Aaron was on the ground in front of the maintenance panel. I was only sure it was Aaron because of the stupid pink suit. Otherwise, there was nothing to identify him by. Something had broken through the front of his helmet and cut him in half down to the shoulders. It had torn right through the metal coupling that attached his helmet to the rest of his suit and split his spine down the middle like a precision cutting laser, but without the scorching. I felt my head swim a bit and realized I was breathing too fast. I had to slow myself down, try to calm the panic that was threatening to rise.
Maybe whatever knocked the power out did that? Some kind of explosion?
I forced myself to some semblance of calm and then entered the engine core. The engine was still running. That was a good thing. If for some reason it had turned off, reigniting the reactor was just about impossible without a dry dock. The engines were designed to never go off. The only thing that should shut one down was a complete cooling failure, which was nearly impossible while the ship was intact. Or a reactor overload. That would cause an impressive explosion. But fortunately, we didn't have either of those problems at the moment. I leaned down and opened the cover to the control panel. There were broken components all over. The reactor wasn't pumping energy anywhere, because the unit that told it where to pump that energy was wrecked. It didn't look like it had failed catastrophically, though. There was no sign of an explosion or a short. This was physical damage. It looked like someone had reached in and smashed or cut everything they could. I looked over at Aaron again. April, do we have a spare control box? I asked. And I didn't like how thin my voice sounded.
You're kidding me. The whole thing?
This seemed to bring her back to the moment. She came up, giving the body a wide berth. April knelt next to me and looked inside.
What? How did... This is...
She reached out and dug around amidst the broken bits.
This has got to be intentional damage, right? Nothing is burnt. The relays are wrecked, but nothing flipped? What can cut through cooling rods like this?
I didn't mention that it was probably the same thing that cut through Aaron. Do we have another control box we can drop in? I asked again. And I could tell a moment later that I wasn't going to love her answer.
I have enough parts to fix everything, but that would take way too long. The other alternative is a spare box. I bought for parts a while back, but it's not meant for a ship of this size. I can maybe get the lights up, start the oxygen scrubbers going so we can reload our air tanks, but there is no way I can get heat and environmental stabilization back online. Those systems drop far too much energy.
April delivered her bad news with a professionalism that I appreciated. All right, let's do that. We can work on restoring more systems once we know we won't run out of air, I said, nodding my head. April's suit also nodded, which was more of a shift of the entire top half. After, we need to go and see the captain. Find out what's going on there, I added, surprised we hadn't heard from him yet. We set to work on setting up the new box. Together it took us about 6 minutes, and then the emergency lights were up, and I felt a small bit more secure. As we finished, I found that everyone was looking at me expectantly, though I was no higher ranking than anyone else there. Well, I might have been higher ranking than Reynard, but only based on time spent aboard.
April should probably stay here and work on getting some more repairs up,
Reynard suggested.
No. I am not staying here by myself.
She replied quickly, crossing her arms in front of her chest in an X.
I don't know what happened to Aaron, but I don't feel safe alone here right now.
Crew, this is Captain Vallon. Thank you for getting the power up again so swiftly. I need everyone to report to the mess immediately. Please bring your station reports.
The captain's voice came in loud and clear across the comms. Well, that was another system that was working now. Looks like that argument is settled for us. Lock the core room, I said, not wanting to have to figure out how to repair things if we lost the new box as well. By the time we reached the mess, most of the rest of the crew was already in place. Including the 3 of us, I counted 8 others. Aaron was missing, but so was the captain's second in command, Thomas. We all took seats around the table. Captain Vallon was in black. Trevino, security, was in gray. Isaac, space janitor, was in green. April, engine, was in blue. Reynard, medic, was in red. Then myself, life support. I was in orange. I could tell the captain was taking stock as we sat around the table, waiting for things to begin. There was an unhealthy silence in the group.
Where's Aaron?
The captain asked. He didn't ask about Thomas, which made me suspect he knew the answer to that question already.
Aaron's dead, sir,
Reynard replied.
We found him in the core room.
Dead?
The captain seemed surprised. There was a pause in which no one spoke. He was cut partially in half, from the head down. I spoke up, expecting someone to ask how.
Was it some kind of accident? He was in the engine room, wasn't he? Is that what put the power out?
The captain followed up. It may have been, but it looks like some kind of physical attack. We found evidence of intentional damage in the power relay. We're running on a barely functional spare. That's why we don't have a breathable environment right now. We can charge the tanks on our suits, but that's about it. I laid out the details of what we found so far. Where's Thomas? The captain took a deep breath and let it out slowly.
Thomas is dead.
He'd gathered himself somewhat, though this news was distressing.
I found him on the bridge near his quarters.
No, he can't be dead. Isaac interrupted the captain. Apologies, sir, he quickly added. I passed Thomas on the way here.
That's not possible. I saw him, and he was very, very dead.
The captain insisted.
He's in the doorway of his room. There was too much for me to clean up. He was a mess.
Well, if Thomas is dead, then who's wearing brown? Isaac put forth the question that I was certain all of us were already thinking about. Those words, who is wearing brown, were enough to have me curling my knuckles into fists and contemplating jumping right the hell out of the airlock. There were 8 of us aboard the ship. Only 8. If 2 of us were dead, then who was wearing the 7th suit?
No, I don't know what's going on here, but I just came from my room by security. I didn't see Thomas at all. I was not that far behind Isaac that I would have missed him.
It was Trevino who spoke up this time.
I'm not sure what you saw, but he couldn't have been heading for security.
Well, there isn't anything between your room's security and our bugs, Isaac said. So unless you're calling me a liar, it seems like you just missed him walking by.
When I turned out of security, I could see your back. Unless he was flying down that hallway, there's no way I missed him.
Trevino insisted.
Listen, we need to stop bickering.
The captain spoke loudly, and everyone went quiet.
We're not getting anywhere this way. Someone had to be mistaken or confused. It doesn't matter at the moment. We are in a dangerous situation. There is some kind of threat aboard the ship, and I'm guessing we are not currently able to get out of here?
He looked at April. She nodded, a slight dip of her suit's faceless glass.
We can't power the navigation computers, and we don't have the power to control the engine output. I can prioritize those systems, but I'm being optimistic if I guess that we're looking at 6 hours of repair time.
6 hours?
Reynard's voice was agitated.
Really?
Listen, if I don't do it right, then you type in the coordinates and our ship skips into a gravity mass and we never even realize we're dead. The best laid course is useless if the ship can't turn the commands into physical actions. These are repairs that require precise work that would normally be done in a dry dock.
April sounded irritated, but that seemed to be an echo of how everyone was feeling.
All right. Isaac, Trevino, I want you two to take care of the bodies in the core and in front of Thomas's quarters.
The captain began to break down tasks.
They deserve that much at least. April and Abel, I want both of you working on getting our travel capabilities back up and running. Reynard, you're with me. We need to figure out the nearest dry dock and get our asses there as quick as we can with as little power as we can.
The captain paused for a moment, and I knew that this was the moment where he would normally look us each in the eyes to instill confidence, but the suits didn't really allow for that kind of meaningful exchange.
Everyone, get to work.
It wasn't lost on me that it split us into even groups. No one was alone, which meant that everyone should have someone to watch over their shoulder. The faltering ship was our first concern. But whoever was killing others was also a concern. What was to gain? They had put themselves in jeopardy by damaging the ship. The body with us was removed fairly quickly, leaving us to work without having that darkness sitting directly next to us. Isaac and Trevino seemed to have a good system down for things, and the process was as painless as it could be.
You have the engine relay isolated yet?
April's voice swept in to distract me from my thoughts and my work. I was just about done, so I quickly swapped the overload switches to an isolated circuit, and then nodded back at her. Engine relay is isolated, and I installed the overload safety just to be on the safe side.
Good thinking.
April's praise was nice. She knew her work, and it was a boost to my ego.
All right, I'm going to bring the system back online. Keep an eye on the...
April! Abel!
A panicked voice came echoing down the corridor, followed by the sound of running footsteps. A gray suit rounded the corner and came through the door.
Isaac's dead. We split up. He each run a cart. It's my fault. I told him it would be safe, but he was running a full cart back to the disposal unit, and he didn't come back, so I went to check on him. It tore him in half at the middle. Just ripped him in two.
What? April and I both said the word together. How could you split up? The captain's orders were clear. Trevino, I thought, should know better than to break orders, especially in a crisis.
It was about 5 minutes. It was a huge mess, and this was speeding things up. I didn't think anything would happen in such a short time, and I figured we could be off the grim detail faster this way.
Trevino.
Come on, Abel. April, we've flown together a long time. You know I wouldn't hurt Isaac.
Why didn't you call the captain?
April asked, and I thought she sounded a bit suspicious as well.
I tried, but the captain didn't answer me. I came looking for you two because you were the closest to where I was on the ship, and I figured there was safety in numbers.
Trevino looked back and forth between us, though it was impossible to read the reflective glass of his suit. I sighed inside my helmet. Captain, do you read? I called across the ship's comm. I waited, and there was no answer. Trevino shrugged.
See? Nothing.
Ship, check in. Anyone seen the captain? I broadcast all channels.
Here with you.
April chimed in.
Also here.
Trevino added. I hardly needed their replies, but I had asked the whole ship. The comm was quiet besides a small bit of feedback for a second.
Maybe something's wrong with the comms again.
April offered. Shit. One of us needs to go find the captain. I couldn't think of a better idea. The silence on the ship was making me uneasy.
I can't go now.
April answered quickly.
If I leave this project where it is now, it will be much more difficult to get back in and get things repaired.
I can't leave you here alone. I looked over at Trevino. I didn't trust him.
Oh, I see.
Trevino sounded a bit angry.
I'm now a risk because of what happened to Isaac.
We have no other witnesses, Trevino. We have to assume the worst. I stated it plainly, but in a tone that I hoped told him I didn't want to argue about the matter. He shrugged his reply. I'll go. Trevino, are you going to be stationed at the door? April, lock the door from the inside, and don't let anyone in. No one. Just get things fixed. I walked across the room and picked up a piece of metal piping that had been part of the guardrail we'd taken down to work on some of the trickier-to-reach systems. Let's go. I waved for Trevino, indicating he should go out of the door first. As I stepped through the doorway, I looked back at April and gave her a nod. She came forward and shut the door. I didn't move until I heard it lock, and then I turned to look at Trevino. Out in the corridor alone, he seemed far more menacing than he had before, though he was just standing in place. Make sure no one gets in there, I told him. Not even the captain. No one needs to go in there other than April. Trevino nodded, and I took that to be the only response he was going to give. Whether he was angry with me or something else was up, I didn't know, but I kept my grip on the pipe and backed away from him until I was far enough away that I knew he couldn't run up on me without me having time to react. Then I turned and started off towards the bridge. I found myself glancing indoors as I walked by them. I passed Trevino's quarters, and something caught my eye. It was a shape in the shadows, something that didn't look like the standard shipboard decoration. It was too bulky and long, sprawled across the floor. I stopped walking and looked in, the lights on my suit washing across the ground. The brown suit was laying on the floor, and it was very full. There was a deep, awful wound torn through the middle of the body, with rips so deep in the corpse that some of them had gouged into the metal beneath. The captain had seen Thomas dead by his cabin. Who was in the brown suit? I leaned in, pushing the body on its back, and reached out for the emergency helmet release. I couldn't leave this question unanswered. It took me a few moments to undo the safeties and pop the helmet, but finally, it rolled off and I found myself looking at Thomas. There was no mistaking him. This was Thomas. Thomas wasn't dead by his cabin. He couldn't be, because he was dead here. What did this mean? My mind spun over the details, and then it all fell into place. I stumbled to my feet and turned back the way I'd come. I began to run. The captain hadn't seen Thomas. He was covering for Trevino, who had claimed to have never seen Thomas. Trevino had killed Thomas and the captain knew. Trevino had probably killed Isaac, and I'd left him there by the door to the engine room. He was protecting the locked door, the door that could only be opened by April, or by the ship's captain with an override. I careened down the hallway, slamming into a wall as I turned a corner, and then I was within sight of the engine room. The door was open, light spilling out into the hallway, and illuminating a figure in a black suit. The captain stood there looking back at me. Shadows flickered in the room off to the side, terrible shadows, depicting something inhuman and awful. I could hear screaming. I'd mistaken it for the hum of a fusion reactor for just a moment, but I knew it was April. "What are you?" I asked in a shaky voice. It was clear these weren't people. Whatever these were, they hadn't come with a crew from the beginning. The gray suit stepped out next to the black. Whatever was hidden inside, all neatly tucked away once more. My fingers tightened on the pipe.
Beware the crazy god lady in apartment 11A, Max told Dell, the new maintenance guy.
Why? Is she dangerous? You'd tell me if she was, right, Max?
The crusty old complex manager picked through the ashtray on his chaotic desk, fished out a butt with a smidge of life left, and lit it with the dwindling cigarette between his lips. In a husky voice ravaged by decades of smoking, he croaked, "No, she's creepy but harmless.
Still, I'd keep things short and sweet with her. You never can tell when somebody's mental fan belt is ready to snap. Don't waste time or the owner's money on repairs. He is one cheap SOB. If you can't fix it with duct tape, WD-40, or picture-hanging wire, put them off till they get fed up and move out. Toolbox and maintenance requests are on top of the filing cabinet. Have fun. Dale wanted more clarity regarding his job duties. Instead, he was getting the old, here's your hat, what's your hurry business. He would have preferred being back doing what he knew best, hanging sheetrock. But with the recession stopping new construction, he had to take whatever he could. Here, he was putting Band-Aids on long-term problems at a low-income housing complex called Forest Oaks. What are you waiting for? Max bellowed. Them clogged toilets ain't gonna unplug themselves. Dale took the beat-up toolbox and the clipboard holding his marching orders and left. Once he was out of range of Max and his unadulterated indifference, Dale perused the day's assignments.
Let's see. We've got Landry Joseph in D9, squealing garbage disposal. Then it's Higgins, Ruth in F3, clogged bathtub drain. Ugh, those things are nasty.
Dale thumbed through the rest of the work orders, stopping at a familiar address.
Evans Baby, and none other than 11A. Well, nice to meet you, God lady. Seems you have a faulty thermostat. No way Monopoly banker guy's gonna spring for that.
Of the 7 residents Dale visited that day, he had only made one happy. 2 had stood over him complaining about the sorry state of the apartment complex. 3 had yelled at him for not fixing their problems. That left the tenant who had demanded that Dale give him his driver's license, so he'd know where to find him when he got his gun back from his cousin. When late afternoon finally reared its head, Dale was ready to call it quits. But before that happened, he had 3 more glorious souls to attend to. The next maintenance request jumped out at him.
Hey, it's Crazy God Lady's turn. Can't wait to meet you, sweetheart.
Dale knocked on the door of 11A, preparing himself to be greeted by someone odd.
Just a moment, please.
A feminine voice called.
I've got to figure out how to get this door open.
Dale's chin dropped to his chest.
And so it begins,
he moaned. Someone fumbled with the locks and the door opened. An elderly black woman peeked out through the wedge of opening.
Can I help you, son?
Her manner was kind, her smile warm and genuine.
Are you Mrs. Evans? I am. Are you looking for my daughter, baby?
If she's the one who placed this maintenance request, then yeah. Is she in?
The woman opened the door.
Come on in, sugar. I'll get baby.
Dale wiped his feet on the ragged welcome mat and entered the apartment. He was struck by the overpowering smell of old dinners. Dusty furniture that hadn't aged well filled the cramped room. A stuffed cat with a missing ear was sitting on the floor next to a stained recliner. Dale cocked his head and thought,
"No, that's not weird."
Baby!
The woman hollered.
The maintenance man is here.
Turning to Dale, she said,
Let me show you the thermostat.
Dale trailed after the old woman as she shuffled along at a snail's pace.
Come on,
he silently pleaded. Finally, they reached their destination.
So what's the problem exactly? The form only says that the thermostat isn't working.
It's gotten awfully warm and stuffy in here. Baby needs it cool.
I'll see what I can do,
Dale said, setting his toolbox down on the dull, dirty carpet. A nearby door creaked open, and a sweet scent of strawberry incense wafted through the room. A grin traveled across Dale's face as he inwardly announced,
And here she is, kids. I give you Crazy God Lady.
He didn't know what to expect, but it wasn't the person gliding toward him with an aluminum walker. The tall, thin woman was of indeterminate age, with deep brown skin. 2 large circles of cold cream decorated her cheeks, making her look like a clown with no sense of style or talent. She was dressed in brilliant white attire. A spiraling turban adorned her head. Elegant gloves covered her arms up to her elbows. The lenses of her wraparound sunglasses were pitch black, making her eyes impossible to see, impossible to read. Dale thought she looked odd, mysterious, and silly. He deliberated before engaging with her.
Whatever you do, don't laugh.
He gave himself a couple of beats before beginning.
Hi, Miss Evans. I'm Dale. The apartment manager sent me here to check on your thermostat. You don't need to explain it to me,
Bebe said dismissively.
I knew you'd be coming today. I have a sense of such things.
Her haughty tone annoyed Dale, who smirked and said,
Yeah, me too. I have a sense of what it says on the form. Want to tell me what the thermostat's doing or not doing? It's not working at all,
Bebe complained.
I must maintain a temperature of precisely 70 degrees. Otherwise, I can't fully observe my universe.
Dale refrained from rolling his eyes, but not being a mouthy smartass was well beyond his ability.
So at 71, you're blind as a bat, universally speaking.
An uncomfortable silence engulfed the room. Dale couldn't see Bebe's eyes, but he felt the heat of her indignation burning into him like an ant under a magnifying glass.
Oh, dear Lord,
the old woman murmured.
You've done and gone and done it now, boy.
Bebe scowled and pushed her walker toward Dale, intimidating him. He stepped backwards until the wall said, Whoa. The woman stood to her full height, looming over Dale.
You don't know who I am, do you? That's understandable. Only my chosen do. I needed to be that way. If anybody else discovered my true identity, it would ruin my plan.
Dale wanted to be on the opposite side of the door. However, since he was stuck inside the strange apartment, he figured he might as well play along.
Your plan, huh? Yes, my plan. Let me ask you, are you aware of the floods, forest fires, and other natural disasters that have worsened over the years? I guess so. Those aren't just a series of random events. They are of my making. I am God.
Dale narrowed his eyes.
You mean God? No, that God is dead. I am his reincarnation. My purpose is to observe and then decide. Decide what? Whether I allow my universe to continue to exist.
Dale was interested, amused.
When did you turn into God? You said you were reincarnated?
Bebe turned from Dale and began prowling the room.
A few years ago, I fell down those stairs outside. Busted up my head pretty good. Soon after, I began having visions. I saw angels, demons, fire, and oblivion. As cosmic perception invaded my consciousness, I had terrible headaches. I was speaking in tongues and couldn't sleep. I didn't know what was happening to me. My husband wanted me to see a doctor, but he couldn't understand that my transformation was beyond human knowledge.
Dale struggled to keep a straight face as Bebe prattled on.
Once God relinquished his infinite energy to me, I rose to a new level of existence. When I shared my divine purpose with my Earth family, they all laughed at me. They were doubters. But as they witnessed my spirit evolving, they became fearful. That's nearly interesting,
Dale quipped.
By all means, continue. My children told their school counselor they were frightened and embarrassed of me. He sent a social worker here to my temple. When she threatened to remove them, I ordered her to leave before my wrath consumed her and her evil ilk. Not long after, my children left with their Earth Father. If only they had stayed, the magnificent gifts I would have bestowed on them. You can still send them a gift card, Dale teased, each of his words oozing sarcasm. Ignoring the slight, Bebe resumed her story. Sadly, I had to accept that I'd become a god without subjects. So with wisdom and purpose, I summoned my Earth Mother to attend to my needs. Her devotion is holy. She's keeping me hidden from the infidels until my time of judgment comes. Dell turned to Bebe's mother to gauge her reaction. She shook her head as if to say, it's the loony bin I'm keeping her hidden from. Snickering, she leaned close to Dell and whispered, I guess I'm Earth Mother, but you can call me Mavis. Given Bebe's blasphemous statements, Dell wondered if he should get out of the apartment before the real god pressed the smite button. Crazy God Lady was shaping up to be one of those difficult tenants he had weighed out. In the meantime, he needed an escape plan. He pretended to rummage through his toolbox. Listen, I don't think I have the right tools to fix your thermostat. I'll be back when I find one. But you hardly looked for it, observed Bebe. Yeah, well, it ain't there, joked Dale. I'm surprised you didn't already know it was missing. This darn heat must still be screwing with your psychic signal. Yes, I suppose you're right. That makes it even more important to remedy the problem. I'll tell you what, Dale. If you fix the thermostat soon, I'll grant you one miracle. Oh, that's all right. I don't need any miracles right now. Are you sure? I can heal broken bodies, bring prosperity. Why, I can even raise the dead. You sure about that? 'Cause I'm looking at an invalid who's sharing a cheap apartment with a dead cat. Mavis giggled under her breath. My powers aren't available to me. That would be self-serving, Bebe explained. But I can bless others. We'll have to keep it to ourselves, of course. Otherwise, I'll give myself away. Dell wrestled with a yawn as Bebe's entertainment value continued to dissipate. He looked at Mavis, who was peering down at her shuffling feet. It seemed as though she too was longing for a wrap-up. I'll chew on it for a while, Dell said. In the meantime, I gotta get going. So many repairs, so little time. Then he thought, and so little interest. He got to the door quickly. By the week's end, Dell was ready to give Max his 2 weeks' notice. Frustration and exhaustion had filled him to the brim. Thinking of his plight, he thought, I'd rather live out of my truck and eat nothing but bologna sandwiches. He looked at the list of impatient tenants demanding to see him, if only for them to have someone to yell at or threaten. As he flipped through the stack of forms, something curled around his ankles. A cat. Get out of here! As the cat fled, Dale noticed its missing ear. I've never seen a cat so banged up before. Only that dead one in. Dale wondered if the stress from the job was making him skittish. He had a lot of work to do, so he gave himself a short mental pep talk. Just be cool, my man. The animals around this dump are as damaged as everything else is. Feeling a tad better, he went about his duties. However, as the day dragged on, uneasiness began clinging to him like cold oil. A few days later, Dell was sitting on one of the rotten picnic benches next to the complex's decrepit playground. Those poor kids, they ought to hook them up to an IV of tetanus vaccine, he remarked to himself. His mood sank further after he looked inside his crumpled brown lunch bag. He had prepared himself for the minuscule budget he'd be living on after he quit by eating bologna sandwiches for lunch every day. Speaking of crappy, he groaned.
He was choking down the cheap dry bread when he heard a siren. Soon its well was rolling through the complex. Dale wasn't concerned. The place had its share of fights, drug deals, and burglaries. He finished his lunch and headed in the ruckus's direction. Dale found an ambulance parked in front of Building 11.
Good thing the action's here,
he thought.
Crazy God Lady can walk over to whoever's messed up and heal them.
Then he saw the door to Bebe's unit open and thought,
Uh-oh, hope she hasn't killed anybody.
He waited along with the ever-growing group of curious residents. Dale turned to the man standing next to him.
Any idea what that's about?
Shoot, I don't know, the man said. It's either that whack job or her mama. Probably the old lady. If it was the whack job, they would have taken a straitjacket in with them. After a while, the EMTs carried Mavis out on a stretcher. She looked unconscious but alive. Her IV bag swung from side to side as they toted her down the rickety stairs and into the waiting ambulance. When the vehicle drove away, the crowd of gawkers dispersed, leaving Dale alone. He wondered if Bebe needed a ride to the hospital. He considered offering her one, but his mind catapulted the idea from his head. The number of work orders he needed to complete was something he thought about. However, his conscience suggested that he'd at least go up and see if Bebe was okay. As he ascended the cracked, warped steps, he told himself,
If it's gonna be an ordeal, just wish her well and leave.
Dale knocked on the door and waited. Nobody was on the other side when it opened. Despite his apprehensiveness, he peered inside the apartment. The sight stupefied him. Bebe was in the kitchen, too far away to have opened the front door. She was humming an eerie melody and stroking the resuscitated cat. She looked at Dale and smiled. Her stained, broken teeth made her look like a feral animal.
Oh, hello there, Dale. You ready for that miracle yet?
Dale's jaw fell ajar. His tongue was as dry as sawdust. As soon as enough warmth returned to his body, he turned and ran, leaving Bebe to her worries and her creepy feline. Dale stopped a short distance later to catch his breath and cull his thoughts. How had Crazy God Lady been able to open the door? Had she been cradling a once-dead cat? A chill climbed the steps of his spine as his heart danced in his chest.
Time to get out of here. This crap's insane.
Despite the waiting tenants, Dale skipped out and went home to do some heavy drinking. The following morning, Dale tracked Max down and gave him his 2 weeks' notice. He took care not to mention the previous day's scare.
I know it's kind of short notice,
Dale explained,
but things aren't working out the way I planned. The stress is getting to me.
I saw this coming a mile away,
groused Max.
If it ain't one thing, it's two. All right, then. Just finish what you can, and I'll notify the owner we need another warm body down here.
Max pulled a small flask from his hip pocket and took a couple of big swigs.
Should you be drinking this early in the day?
Asked Dale.
Hey, it's 8 o'clock somewhere,
Max declared. He gave a parting burp and staggered away, giving a wide berth to some large imaginary object in his path. Dale was relieved that his departure was official, leaving him in a good mood for the rest of the morning. He was unscathed by the crude and impersonal epithets hurled at him by the inhabitants of the dysfunctional complex, as his soul had flown too high for their offenses to reach. He only allowed the swirl and chatter to affect him once when he overheard Mavis had died from complications related to her high blood pressure.
Her daughter's a laughing loon,
he thought.
But the old woman was sort of sweet. Can't help wondering what's going to happen to Crazy God Lady without her.
By late afternoon, things were winding down. Dale had fixed a leaking toilet in 7G and was heading back to drop off the paperwork and toolbox. The shortest path took him alongside Building A. The thought of Crazy God Lady returned to him as he walked past her apartment, giving him the willies. Looking up at the open window, he saw movement. He stopped to take a better look. His face blanched when he saw Mavis close the curtains. Dale's lungs refused to pull in air. A part of him feared the ghost might see him, stealing his soul with a single glance. Fueled by terror and adrenaline, he sprinted to the office. As soon as he arrived, he threw open the door, leaned in, and threw the toolbox and clipboard toward the filing cabinet. Then he fled as though his sanity depended on it. On his way home, he returned to the liquor store. The fright had made him a thirsty boy again. As his tenure with the complex dwindled, Dale avoided walking near Building A. Although it had happened days prior, he still broke out in prickles of fright whenever he recalled the dead woman's image in the window. On his last day, Dale was attempting to repair the cooling coil on a refrigerator. As he labored in vain, he thought of the classic song by Queen, Another One Bites the Dust. After pronouncing the appliance dead, he began quietly packing his tools, hoping to avoid a verbal nipple twisting from the resident. He paused when he overheard the man talking on the phone.
I'm telling you, Reggie, Shauna said she could have sworn she saw Mavis picking up the mail outside Baby's door. I told her she needed to get off the pipe. People are just taking that voodoo daughter of Mavis's too seriously.
So it wasn't my imagination,
Dale thought. The realization only added to his horror. The tenant, Rogers was his name, overheard Dale filling his toolbox.
Listen, I gotta go. The useless repairman's getting ready to leave. I need to make sure the fridge got fixed.
The loud noise of the angry man stomping toward the kitchen interrupted Dale's thoughts. He steeled himself for the fury guaranteed to follow his bleak assessment of the refrigerator.
Oh, I know you ain't leaving me with a busted fridge.
No, sir. It's not that. It's just that I need to order a new part. It should arrive in a few days, tops.
Dale knew Max would never place the order, but he reasoned that after today he'd be long gone from the land of the lovable losers and its odd inhabitants, including their pets. After completing his final assessment, Dale returned to the office to tie up any loose ends with Max before leaving for good. He discovered the crotchety old man sitting at his desk listening to a baseball game through a scuffed-up radio on top of a filing cabinet. Wispy clouds of blue smoke filled the cramped office, adding to the dry stench left by millions of cigarettes smoked over the years. Dale stared at the man who oversaw the dumpster fire called Forest Oaks and felt a twinge of pity. Poor Max seemed like someone who looked back on his life forlornly, knowing that it had whipped him.
All done, boss. Guess this is where we shake hands and part ways.
Not so fast, my friend. As Max spoke, the ubiquitous cigarette adhered to the corner of his mouth bounced around like an orchestra conductor's baton. Before you go bebopping out of here, we got one more request to tend to. You didn't think you'd leave early on your last day, did you? I need you to take one final beating.
Max, I'd rather smear my privates with honey and go looking for hungry bears.
Come on, kid. You can handle it. It's the last one. Dale's shoulders slumped, his mouth drooping in a frown of disappointment. Okay, what do you got? Well, my boy, are you going out in style? It's for 11A, Crazy God Lady. Please hold your applause till the very end. She wants you to check out that stupid thermostat again, Max continued. Just give her the quick once-over to shut her up. Then tell her the new guy'll handle it. See? It's easy peasy lemon squeezy. George Jefferson married Wheezy. As Max laughed at the witty remark, a wet ball of phlegm lodged inside his hitching chest, causing Dale to grimace in disgust. The old man coughed so forcefully that it sounded like he was trying to hack up exact change. The sickly puddle made it as far as his throat before he swallowed it, sending it back into his tobacco-ravaged lungs. Whoa, he said proudly. That was a keeper. Returning to his instructions, he said, Now, where was I? Oh, yeah. Get this whack job off my back and out of my life. Now would be good.
Max, listen, Dale stammered. I'd rather not take this one on. Can't you wait and give it to the next guy? You sent me there on my first day. It'll be a great way to break 'em in. Come on, Max, please.
Max shook his head, making it clear to Dale that his idea was a no-go. Kid, it's only 3 in the afternoon. Technically, you're on the clock for another 2 hours. Just knock this one out and I'll cut you loose early. Dale had no desire to enter the domain of the self-professed god again, and if Mavis was traipsing about, he didn't want to see her. Sensing Dale's hesitation, Max put the pedal to the metal with his coercion. I'd hate for the main office to hold on to your last paycheck because you clocked out before your scheduled time. Then he played his last card by challenging Dale's manhood. You ain't spooked by crazy god lady, are you? Ha! What a sissy. The words hit Dale hard enough to make him ponder his decision.
You know that you'll always regret not meeting this head-on. Just go and face your fears. There was no ghost, is no ghost, and will never be a ghost.
However, much like the residents when he peddled his spiel, he wasn't buying it. He wanted to be done with the place, so he went along to get along.
All right, I'll do it. But when I'm done, I'm done. That's the deal, Smokehouse.
Max looked impressed. Smokehouse? I like that one. See, you have some backbone after all. Seriously, kid. Take one for the team and I'll give you the best reference in the world. Dale forced a disingenuous grin.
Gee, thanks, Max.
Grabbing the toolbox, he headed out the door. Behind him, he heard Max yell, "Don't let crazy god lady curse you, dipwad!" Dale waited a few minutes before knocking on Bebe's door. Despite his earliest boost of courage, he regretted his decision. He rapped on the door. The bologna sandwich rolled around in his stomach. Suddenly, the front door flew open as if a violent gust of wind had struck it. Again, there was no one there. He hesitated to enter.
Hello? Miss Evans?
From the entrance, Dale watched the bedroom door open. Bebe, dressed head to toe in her ethereal ensemble, pushed her walker into the living room.
Yes, Dale. Come inside and close the door.
Panting with every footstep, Dale entered, closing the creaking door behind him. He waited before speaking, hoping his voice wouldn't betray his nervousness. When he was ready, he said,
I'm sorry, ma'am, but I still don't have the part to fix your thermostat.
I thought you said it was a tool you required.
Dale felt unguarded.
It's a part and a tool. Listen, a new guy's starting on Monday. The stuff to fix it should be here by then.
Bebe cocked an eyebrow in suspicion and drew closer to Dale.
It's too warm in here for me to know if you're lying. Perhaps she can get the truth out of you.
A stiff hand gripped Dale's shoulder from behind. He quaked as he turned his head. Mavis peered into his eyes, displaying the warm smile he remembered from their first meeting. Nothing about her appeared ghostly. She was simply alive again. Frigid blood gushed through Dale's veins like glacial water. A throaty growl rising from the floor drew Dale's eyes downward. Seeing the resurrected cat turned his flesh to stone. Bebe addressed Mavis, her voice seeming far away like a whisper from another room.
Earth Mother, is this man lying to us?
Mavis continued smiling as she nodded her head to signal yes. Bebe became enraged.
You've lied to your God for the last time,
she snarled.
You've been indifferent, dishonest, and disrespectful. What should I do with you, infidel?
Dale's body threatened to faint. He needed to leave. He turned toward the door, but seeing Mavis standing there with her eternal grin changed his mind. The cat serpentined through Dale's legs like a thick snake, making him jerk and back away. His gaze bounced between crazy god lady, the walking corpse of Mavis, and the hissing one-eared cat. He took a few steps backward, tripping over a cardboard box. He dropped through the empty air, arms pinwheeling. There was a loud crack as Dale's head hammered the wall behind him, snapping his neck. Unable to move, breathing became difficult. From his shoulders down, he was a lifeless hunk. Bebe moved her walker until she stood over him, a look of satisfaction on her dark face.
Well now, Mr. Maintenance Man, I believe you just broke your neck. Soon you're going to die. You should have fixed the air conditioning. I would have granted you a miracle. I still can if you repent of your transgressions.
Fear and desperation flooded Dale's emotions. He could sense his life drifting from him like a vapor. He appealed to the woman who could raise the dead and heal the broken.
I'm so sorry for everything I did to offend you. Please, I want to live. I forgive you, but you need to understand that resurrection has its rules. First, you must die. Then you will face my judgment. Now speak the truth this time. Do you believe I have the power to raise you? If so, you have my promise of renewed life.
Dale looked at the woman whom he had ridiculed, realizing that he had judged her harshly, ignorantly.
Yes, I believe.
Nothingness. Dale yanked air into his body. He felt weak and drowsy, like he had awakened from an all-night bender. As his mind returned to life, he recalled recent moments from the world he had left, working with his hands, fixing lights and holes in walls. Then an image of crazy god lady invaded his memory. She'd promised him something, but a promise of what? Life? It was life. And healing. He smiled as he wiggled his toes and drummed his fingers.
Well, what do you know? That Looney Tune's the real deal, he said.
Dale tried sitting up and bumped his head. Despite his eyes being open, he couldn't see anything. His searching hands probed the darkness.
Where am I?
He wondered. Confused and alarmed, he cried out.
Hey, God lady! Where are you? Miss Evans?
Dale waited for a reply. When no one answered, he began picking through myriads of explanations.
Maybe I'm dreaming. I might be in limbo. What if I'm alive, but...
His body sweated pearls of ice as he grasped what had happened. And it was awful. A heavy horror seized him as he realized crazy god lady had kept her word. He had been raised from the dead, healed. However, there had been judgment involved. Dale began sobbing, trapped in the eternal blackness. He could just make out the sound of rain hammering his grave.
Chilling tales for dark